Hi everyone, my name is Kayla. I have a Bachelor of Health Science Naturopathy and I'm a naturopathic Kayla the Nurturing Naturopath. Welcome to my podcast Awareness, and today I have Melissa joining me from Limbs for Life. Melissa, how are you?
Really well, thanks, Kayla, and thanks so much for having me.
No worries, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. Could you please tell us what Limbs for Life is?
Sure. So we're a non-profit charity. We're the peak body for people with limb loss, amputation in Australia, and work to create awareness around the impact of amputation, provide a range of programs and services to our community nationally. So in a nutshell,
Amazing.
that's pretty much us.
Beautiful. And how many Australians are impacted by amputation?
So conservative figures estimate that in 2019 there was just over 160,000, with a 2.2% growth each year on top of that. So if we were to do 2.2 as to now, we're probably getting very close to the 200,000 mark, sadly.
Yeah, wow,
Um,
that's
so, but it's not just the individual, obviously, it's, their family members, friends, work colleagues. It has very much a ripple effect on people in a variety of ways. So yeah, we're a
definitely.
huge community and probably one of the biggest physical disability cohorts in the country as far as disability goes.
Wow. Wonderful. Could you please tell us what peer support is?
Of course. So peer support is actually a human right. A lot of people aren't aware of that, but under the UN Convention of Rights for People with Disabilities, peer support falls under Article 26, which is the right to have peer support. And Limbs for Life's flagship program is our peer support program. So having said that, we have just over 200 trained amputees, people living with limb loss, who have undergone training, have adapted to amputation, and they provide early intervention support to people, sometimes pre-surgery and also immediately post. So our volunteers operate throughout the country, obviously, but sometimes see people, as I said, pre-amputation, but then in acute care hospitals and in rehabilitation, and then sometimes back in the community. So it's a lived experience program where people who have undergone amputation can share, their journey and lived experience with someone who is sometimes fearful and facing limb loss, which is obviously incredibly challenging and a big impact to everyone.
Yeah, exactly. It would be like fearful and you would sort of feel on your own. So having, someone who's been through that would be really helpful.
Most definitely. Helps them work through the steps, what to expect, etc. moving forward. Yeah, very much so. Excuse me, a bit of a frog.
No, that's okay. Could you please tell us what the steps are to recovery? I guess it would sort of depend on the individual and
Most definitely. So there's a range of causes for amputation in Australia. Someone might have a motor vehicle or workplace related accident. Um, Someone might lose their limb to cancer, or a really severe infection like meningococcal, which could result in multiple limb amputations, vascular disease, and then also type 2 diabetes, which is probably makes up about 80% of total amputations in Australia. In fact, we've got the second highest rate of diabetic related amputations in the developed world. So um, with respect to recovery, regardless of whether you're an upper limb or a lower limb amputee, a lot of it depends on, what your health was like prior,
yeah.
whether you're having an amputation due to illness or injury, because obviously if it's illness, you've got the impact of that illness that you've got to manage, post surgery. Um, and then your general health and also the level of amputation plays a big part. So if you're a lower limb amputee and you're having a below knee amputation, then chances are that you'll probably, if you're otherwise healthy, regain your independence a lot quicker than someone who has an above knee amputation where they're replacing, knee and ankle joints, so two joints, and then similarly to someone who's undergone a hemipelvectomy amputation, which is three joints, so their hip joint, their knee joint, and their foot joint. So regaining mobility in that space, depending on the cause of the amputation, the journey to recovery is going to be a lot longer than, say, someone who's potentially, even had a trauma accident that wasn't ill or sick prior, yet their recovery from the amount of surgeries and the impact of the accident on other areas of their body might take time too. So there's really no one size fits all. It's very varied. And similar, people who have undergone amputation upper limbs will usually be because it's either a meningococcal, where it could be a hand or partial arm, whole arm, workplace injury as well, and or cancer. So the vascular and diabetic related amputations primarily only affect lower limb, whereas those others can affect upper limb. And, recovery for upper limbs will be, trying to adapt to using what may be their non-dominant hand, and just getting by doing daily living tasks, because for the majority of us, it's about, learning how to do things again, but probably in a different way, because we don't have all the things that we used to have, i.e. a limb in some place. So yeah, there really isn't a roadmap, I guess. There's pathways through rehab, being fitted for prostheses if you're healthy enough and eligible, and then learning to use that device and feel safe in the community, ambulating, or, even, doing daily living tasks at home for upper limb amputees.
Yeah,
So it's
like you were saying.
wide and varied, Kayla. It's there's no one size fits all.
Yeah, so true. And like you were saying, if it's an upper limb, sort of, and if it's your non-dominant hand, it's sort of learning, how to do everyday things again. So
Yeah, and it's basic things, even like cleaning your teeth. It's
exactly right.
often, for our community, it's the really simple, well, what most people consider simple, but day-to-day tasks. And similarly, for lower limb amputees, depending on the side of their amputation, learning to drive again if it's their right leg, trying to navigate in and out of showers and wet areas where, you've got a falls risk happening there. So yeah, often it's the little things, just walking through the community and hoping that people, don't knock you over.
Yeah,
Fall prevention, a lot of that sort of thing. So yeah, getting dressed even, do you still put on a pair of pants the same way? I know it sounds sort of
yeah.
fickle, but
No,
there's some of the issues that people face. Yeah.
exactly right. And I think, we sort of take it for granted, unless something happens to us or, someone else we sort of know.
Oh, most definitely. And look, people have got no reason to really for it to be front of mind, because they're not impacted by it. So that makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah,
I
exactly
kind of
right.
get that. But yeah, it's quite fascinating. And different people have different struggles, but for the most part, our journeys, while they're different, do align. And that's where peer support can be so valuable too.
Oh, that's amazing. And we sort of touched on this, but like you were saying, if someone's healthy beforehand, they're
Yeah.
usually okay depending on what's amputated, but they can be health problems.
Yeah, like I think they can have long-term health effects. Someone who, regardless of whether they're in an accident or lose a limb or multiple limbs due to meningococcal, if they're placed in a coma, then you've got organ recovery and things like that. So I'm not trying to downplay it and make out like anything's easy, but it is wide and varied. And similarly, if someone has an amputation due to cancer, then chances are they're going to have to undergo radiation therapy or
Yeah,
chemo. Um, with diabetes, making sure that, their medication is still working, and are they going to have to change their diet, so that
yeah,
they don't lose their second limb? Because if there aren't some significant lifestyle changes for below knee amputees or lower limb amputees losing limbs to type 2 diabetes, then history sort of shows us that they'll lose a second leg within 3 to 5 years. So,
yeah.
the impact on, being a bilateral below knee amputee or lower limb amputee is really significant.
Yeah, wow.
And the
And
impact
are
of
there,
energy, like
yeah,
using a prosthesis burns a lot of energy. So, is that person going to have the endurance capabilities to learn to walk again?
yeah, that's very true. And are there different sorts of prosthetics depending on what limb it is and what the person's doing and things?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, we've seen prosthetic technology just advance out of this world since about 2008, 2009. So sadly, often advancements in prosthetics are based around the war. So when the Iran and Afghanistan wars took off, the American government granted a lot of money for research and development into prosthetics. And look, prior to them, they were very old-fashioned, very mechanical with technology from, the 60s and 70s and knee units that looked like door hinges that would just, open and close. And I certainly learnt to walk on one of those. I used to fall over all the time.
Mm.
Upper limbs were like a hook, like you would see in a cartoon, or like Captain Hook in Peter Pan. So very, very basic, but we've seen a huge advance in prosthetics, probably in the last 10 years, whereby they've got computers in them, they're microprocessors for
Mhm.
lower limbs, they're fall prevention, so they know if
Right.
someone's going to fall and the knee will lock and prevent that
Oh,
happening.
wow.
Anti-stumble sensors in ankles. I can change the resistance on my phone of the yield for when I'm going down a hill, because my good
Mhm.
leg's a bit dodgy, but going down a hill puts a lot of strain on my sound side. So, I can adjust the way the prosthesis works and functions in that sort of space. And similarly for upper limb amputees, there hadn't been really any advancements for years and years and years.
Mm.
And in the past, probably 4 years, we've seen, the dexterity of fingers really just going forward in leaps and bounds. And they're trying to work on touch sensations so that someone can experience heat and cold.
Oh,
And I
wow.
think the other thing
Cool.
that's really fascinating is with the early trials on the hands, like
Yeah.
I mean, we just hold a coffee cup. We know that we're not going to
Yeah.
break that cup, or an egg. An egg's a great example. Whereas with a
Yeah.
prosthetic hand, it would just squash an egg. Um, but people can train using sensors to make sure that, that hand is working in a way that, it's gentle when it needs to be and hard when it doesn't. So, um, yeah, it's just mind-boggling. But moving forward all the time, I think for the most part, what's sad about this, given that, Australia is such a rich country, or at least, we
Mm.
were, um, but with the introduction of the NDIS, we're seeing more people access this higher end technology. But those who are over 65 and ineligible, while the technology is available, we haven't seen increases in funding under the public system since
Mhm.
1998. And it's something that as an organisation we're always lobbying for, because we know it's the older, more vulnerable folk in our community that are impacted by falls. So
Yeah.
it's up to governments to front end load that funding rather than, you know, being cost prohibitive. When we think if someone has a fall and they break a hip, how long are they
Yeah,
in hospital for? How long are they in
exactly.
rehab for? What's their long-term care? And, on the funding goes. Whereas, if you were to, I guess, invest 30, 35,000 and give that person a microprocessor knee with fall prevention
Yeah.
stability in there, then, 30 grand compared to, hospital admin costs, which are
Yeah,
explosive, would save them a fortune. We just need some
exactly.
data and research to argue our case. But something I'm
Yeah.
really passionate about increasing in that space, and something that we've been advocating and lobbying for ages.
Oh, amazing. Well, hopefully change comes sooner rather than later. Fingers
We can
crossed.
only keep trying, Kayla. You just got to keep banging on these doors.
Exactly right. And you sort of mentioned the funding. Funding's only available to certain groups of people. Is that correct?
Yes. So, well, no, everyone in Australia has access to prosthetics if they're healthy enough and eligible for one. So, any Australian citizen has access to that, if they're healthy. If someone's had an amputation due to, say, vascular, and they've got heart complications, then walking with a prosthesis, say as an above knee amputee, it's probably going to be the amount of energy expenditure is usually plus 65% what you would
Oh,
use, for example.
yeah.
So, that's a big impact on someone's heart if they've already got heart issues. But yeah, funding, the NDIS has been amazing for our community, because prior to that, they were very limited. And as I said, state and territory budgets who manage funding for prosthetics in each state and territory for people over 65 who are ineligible. Like that funding hasn't increased for ages. So I just really, I mean, we're almost 26 years since there's been, an increase in funding. I'd really like to see that change.
Yeah.
Given, we do see governments waste a lot of money. So
Yeah,
that would be an
exactly right.
investment. And I
Yeah.
think it'd be a real positive investment, because if we look at older people, often they feel isolated. Disability can make them more isolated. The opportunity to engage in their community and participate, whether that be socially or, economically in a workplace for even, part-time or casual employment, it's great for people's long-term mental health. It's just,
Exactly
it's
right.
positive all around.
Yeah, not just physical but mental. Yeah,
Correct,
exactly.
correct. And it reduces that isolation and,
Mhm.
social isolation, which often older, vulnerable people are impacted by, because, their networks become smaller and, people get sick of visiting people, unfortunately. So
Yeah,
if they can get out and participate in community, then it's so much, the advantage to community as a whole, I think is really, really positive.
yeah, definitely. So true. And are people able to donate to Limbs for Life?
Oh, yes, of course they are. Yes, please. So we're a registered charity. We're a national organisation. Limbs for Life aren't generally government funded. So we are actually turning 20 in October this year.
Oh,
And,
wow.
aside from a few government grants, we've pretty much been self-sustainable. But yeah, as I said, we don't have regular ongoing funding. So we like to make a big impact. I think the organisation's very dynamic, and we work to service and support, as many people impacted by amputation as humanly possible. So, it would be amazing. The smallest little bit makes a big difference to us.
Yeah, exactly right. Every little bit helps. So hopefully people listening will donate so you can continue the great work you do,
Thank you. And look,
giving.
most definitely. And look, I say that too because um, our population is so vast. Like we still print a lot of materials because people with diabetes might have vision issues, um, and I think for some of our resources, I don't know if you're like me. You get an email and you read it, and then it's kind of by the wayside. Whereas if our journey handbooks, from hearing the news to all the way through to independent living, they're books that people can refer back to. And
Yeah.
we supply all of those free of charge. We do everything at no cost to the end user. So we never want to have to charge for our service, because we think it's so, it's so valuable to people. And if we can help people get back into that independent living and adapt successfully, then we've ticked a box. So yeah, anything is very helpful to us.
Oh, beautiful. And could you tell us what Limbs for Kids is?
Sure, sure. So Limbs for Kids is a program which sits under Limbs for Life, and primarily it's a program for parents and children who are impacted by amputation. So kids who might be born with a limb deficiency or undergo amputation at a young age. We have a separate family-based peer support program for them. So families can get together with one another if their child has been born without an upper limb. Interestingly, if it's a birth deficiency in kids, it's usually 95% upper limb and only 5% lower limb, whereby kids who are impacted by a trauma accident, which is not uncommon, but it can happen in rural and farming properties, things like that, is usually a lower limb. So, and or meningococcal lower limb too. So, yeah, it's a really nice way to bring families together. We also have an online support group for both, because
Oh,
I think
beautiful.
around the time of COVID, when people couldn't get together face to face, it was really helpful to set up those like Facebook closed group networks so that people
Yeah,
still had access to communication.
yeah, oh, beautiful. Is there anything you wanted to recap or talk about that you feel like we haven't spoken about?
Off the top of my head, I don't think so. Yeah, look, not that comes to mind. We've got a lot of information on our website if any of your listeners are seeking information, there's a lot of resources there. Please feel free to trawl through the website. If you've got any healthcare providers that listening, then, and you want to refer a client, we're really happy to facilitate that on your behalf. If you want any resources for your clinics or facilities, also really happy to provide those too. So, no, I think that's about it, Kayla. I'm just really grateful for the opportunity.
No worries. Thank you.
Oh, can I make one more point?
Yeah, of course.
Sorry.
Yeah.
We have our National Amputee Conference coming up in Adelaide in March next year.
Wow.
We are expecting about 350 amputees. We work to run that at cost neutral almost. So unlike a lot of healthcare provider conferences, it's very, very cheap. But if anyone's listening that is an amputee or facing amputation, get your tickets while they're early bird before 30 September. It's a great way to come together. And, the vibe from, the community when they get together is just unmeasurable. It's amazing.
Wow, that sounds so cool. And like you were saying, for further information, should people go to your website and your Facebook page?
Absolutely. Yes, please. We're on Instagram, LinkedIn, we're just about everywhere. So wherever they can find us, and it's LIMS the number 4 life. So if people are looking for us, that's where we're at.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, making us more aware about Limbs for Life. I really appreciate it.
Not at all, Kayla. I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone for listening. Take care and have a lovely day. Bye.